Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. Initially, I had said, well, after finishing with Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, I'm done for the year. I'm not going to read anything more. And then I picked up a novel, a brief thing, 90 pages, less than 100 pages, and read it. A novel set in Palestine, enjoyed it very much. That's it, I said. Then I decided, well, I might as well avail myself of the opportunity to read Was Huck Black? So I've got 50 pages left on this, and I should be done by the end of the year. Knock on wood. And yesterday I picked up another book and read it. And this is just a wonderful book. It was a joyful or joyous, no, it was a joyful experience. The book itself was joyous. Now, you may have a different experience with this kind of book, but this book appeared in a video that I previously did in which I talked about my Historathon plans, wanting to focus on primarily books pertaining to ancient China. And I've said I was going to start with this one come January 1st. And this will be followed by one on the Eastern civilization. And then I thought, well, in that video, I pulled out this book. I said, I don't even know why I have this book or what it is. I said, it looks interesting. And I still don't know why I have this. There's no price tag on the book. There's nothing written inside the cover. I have no recollection of the circumstances under which I obtained it. All I can suppose is that I was somewhere, maybe the Heritage Museum in Chicago or something, when they had a big bunch of books for sale and they just said paperback $1, something like that. I don't know. And I picked it up just because I thought, well, this looks right up my alley. And whatever prompted me to pick it up, I was right. And I wanted to bring it to the attention of anybody who is thinking about delving into ancient China for Historathon or for any other purposes, of course. So this book is, how many pages total? 59 pages total. Some of those pages are given over to charts and figures, that kind of thing. But number one, I want to comment on this book. It is just such a gorgeous book. It is just beautiful. Published by the University of Washington Press. It says University of Washington Press, Seattle and London. And look at this font. I mean, I don't know what it is, Bodoni or something. It's just lovely. And this is another one, I think. And I just, once in a while there are tags that come around on BookTube about beautiful books, and this book is just stunningly beautiful all the way through. The text is not small. So for a 57-page book or whatever, it's not small. It raises my year-end tally up to 47, I think. I mean, why should something like this count? But, you know, I'm jamming in all these short things at the end, I guess. And, I mean, not that only, but look at the layout. I mean, look at this. Digging up China's past. I mean, lovely. There's only 3 chapters. So, origin and early development. I mean, lovely. And yes, I did. I checked at the back of the book to see if they would indicate what sort of font they were using, and there's no saying at all. I mean, there's nothing on the cover to indicate who did this calligraphy. I mean, it's just really nicely done, standard Chinese. So you've got the author's name, and then you've got the title. And I had not known anything about him, and I would like to read excerpts from it. So if you think that my recommendation is good enough and you want to go and pick up this book and you don't need to hear any more, that's fine. But I just want to read some of this. So there is a foreword by Millard Rogers from the Seattle Art Museum. And let me just read a little bit of that. And then I'll give you a little excerpt from the book itself. The origin of Chinese culture is paralleled in importance only by the rise of civilizations around the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Middle East. Systematic investigation of the early Mediterranean cultures was well developed during the 19th century. The cultures of the Middle East, including the Indus Valley, were rediscovered by archaeological work only in the 20th century. Our first concrete evidence of a literate early Bronze Age in China was discovered at the turn of this century when oracle bones found at Anyang were recognized as authentic inscriptions in the Chinese language written by the people of the Shang dynasty. Oracle bones were made from the scapulae of cattle or from tortoise shells, which were flattened and carved. On the faces of the oracle bones, diviners inscribed questions addressed to the spirits. Heat was applied to the back of the bone or shell, and an answer to the question was determined by the character of the T-shaped cracks that appeared on the face. During the 19th century, these bones were collected for medical purposes. They were known as dragon bones to old-fashioned Chinese druggists and physicians who ground them into powder which was prescribed for nervous disorders. When it was discovered that dragon bones bore archaic characters of the Chinese language, an interest was aroused in China far exceeding our current curiosity concerning the discovery and translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This was published in 1957, I think, by the way. At first, even Chinese paleographers could make out only a word here and there. After much patient work by a large number of Chinese and a few Occidental scholars, the bone inscriptions were read, but some skeptics still doubted their authenticity. It was not until after the first scientific excavations were begun at Anyang under the direction of Dr. Li Qi that the inscriptions were proved genuine. I should say my pronunciation of the Chinese is terrible, particularly the transliterated, but I think his name would be Li Ji or something like that. You look him up on Wikipedia. What a lovely looking man. So let me just go on a little bit about what he did. The archaeological site of Anyang is the largest, and this is what is making this the most exciting thing I've read in a long while. In that book about Mark Twain, and the author Shelley Fisher Fishkin is very good, but she's delving into questions like, Mark Twain's character of the runaway slave Jim, were the incidents in the novel based upon minstrel shows that Twain was a lover of, or were they based on actual slaves he knew from that his family owned or that were in the neighborhood, etc. I mean, it's I guess kind of interesting, but this this is the sheer excitement of discovering just a whole new world opening up. And it comes through in the narrative. So even though the information will be outdated, no doubt, you get this first person account. And I believe he also has a book about the excavation specifically. So let me just continue a little bit more. The archaeological site of Anyang is the largest and most important in China. Grave robbers and the curio dealers for whom they worked had for many years used it as a great mine for bronze artifacts. The prohibitions against disturbing ancestral graves in China, plus the obvious commercial advantages of such an excellent source of antiquities, worked hand in hand to keep Anyang a place of mystery. It was the interest in the inscribed bones, which came from the same site, that led to Dr. Li Qi's opportunity to excavate it scientifically. The significance of Dr. Li Qi's work as director of the excavations at Anyang can be compared with that of Heinrich Schliemann's excavations at the site of Troy. For though the evidence obtained from one monument, for through the evidence obtained from one monumental excavation, the legendary Shang dynasty passed from the status of heroic myth to that of documented history, just as the age of Agamemnon, Menelaus, Helen, and Hector came to be recognized as fact rather than fiction as a result of Schliemann's work. I should add that's professor at Washington, University of Washington, or no, the Art Museum, is overreaching a little bit there. If you read Moses Finley's The World of Odysseus, you will realize that the thread connecting the sites of Schliemann are quite tenuous to the literary epics of Homer. Worth noting, worth reading about. But of course, I heard about Schliemann years ago. It's an appendix in this book, standard in all editions of this work. And of course, you come across the name of Schliemann often enough. And then he contrasts the two men a little bit. In training and background, however, Schliemann and Dr. Li Qi were entirely different. Heinrich Schliemann was a wealthy amateur inspired with the romance of archaeological investigation, but lacking professional or scientific training. Dr. Li Qi began his excavating career supported by sound academic training in anthropology and archaeology. And then it goes on to give you more biographical details about this author. And I should add, just as a note, these excavations were begun in the year 1928, so we are fast coming upon the centenary of it, but it just is remarkable what has been done in the past century, what exciting times these have been for the history of China. As a note, I think we are around about 150 years for Schliemann. This appendix was an essay that was written for the 100th anniversary of it, or the centenary again. So this Schliemann was about 50 years before this. And I should add that in the early days, I couldn't find this book with that other batch that I showed, Casey Chang. He was my go-to author for China, I guess. I considered him my third historian, even though he is not really a historian. And I also read Mark Edward Lewis's book, Sanctioned Violence. And that was a marvelous book, which I loved, but it was not any kind of a history, a general history. And if you follow my channel, you know that I recently read 3 books in the Harvard Imperial China series, this being the first one, the first 3 being written by Mark Edward Lewis, and it opened up worlds to me. And one thing that it did specifically was it gave an overview of the history, because even though he starts with Imperial China, there were dynasties that preceded Imperial China, and he had to give a real quick recap of that information. So some years ago, maybe even a decade by now, I read this other book by Casey Chang. And again, it was a case of I really had a hard time with it. Archaeology is not an easy subject for me. It's just very hard to read about all of the sites and all of the things dug up and that kind of thing. And this book was just so smooth and so comprehensible and so easy to ingest. I mean, he's not giving you any kind of a history. He's just giving you the roughest overview of the beginnings of Chinese history. And so this book, carbon-14 dating, had been invented by this time, but I don't think it was really employed at the time this book was written. I don't know if it was being used or if it was in a workable state yet. And certainly DNA was not. So the information here might, as I say, and may well be outdated, but on the other hand, it has the advantage of this first-person excitement, and it has also the advantage of you're not. I forget, in his book Evidence and Models, M.I. Finley talks about how, we're in a state now where the worry is that you wind up with an overplus of information. That was my word, not his. Just you have a plethora of details and statistics, and it's hard to assess that. So this is coming at a time when none of that existed. And so for an entry point into the beginnings of ancient China, this is really, really marvelous. And then I am hoping I have other books of, this was good because it gave a sort of a macro overview. This is going in depth, and then when next I hit the topic, say with something more recent, I think I should be in pretty good shape. So let me just read a little bit from the book itself. And his writing is really good. The map is better, more usable than anything in the Harvard series. I mean, the Harvard maps are okay. So we get some personal anecdote, but it's not like a book written now that would be all anecdote with a little bit about the topic at hand. More than 40 years ago, when I was first admitted to the middle school, I used to feel extremely happy to know that I was born in a country whose history had already lasted 5,000 years. I say 5,000 years because it was actually the figure given to the youthful mind of my generation. The Sumerian civilization and the Egyptian civilization, we were told, might have started earlier, but they were also dead long ago. The Hindus, too, enjoy a long tradition, but their men of learning, till recently, never seemed to think it worthwhile to put their tradition on written records. So, when all these things have been considered, China is certainly the oldest country still existing on this earth and possesses the longest, and this is important, continuous written history of all the nations. This was my understanding of China's past before the time of the Chinese Revolution. After the revolution, things began to change. There was a time when the reformers of China were skeptical about everything recorded in and about the past, including history itself. The Renaissance movement in the early 20th century was essentially a rationalist movement, more or less akin in spirit to that of the classicists of the 17th century. Their slogan, "Show your proof," though destructive in nature, did bring about a more critical spirit in the study of ancient China. Thus, if one wants to pay excessive tribute to the golden age of Yao and Shun, well, show your proof. If one wishes to talk about the engineering miracles of the great Yu of the 3rd millennium BC, proofs must also be given. What must be remembered in this connection is that written records alone were no longer accepted as valid proofs. This proof-seeking movement created a great deal of havoc with the traditional learning and revolutionized the method of classical studies. Modern archaeology in China was born in this atmosphere. The task of a modern archaeologist in China, however, is not limited to the search for proofs in order to reinstate the glories that were China's past. His more important mission is rather to answer a set of new questions conceived in the light of modern science, but only dimly perceived by historians of bygone generations. The questions so raised are of two different categories, but are closely interwoven with each other. The one is concerned with the origin and the formation of the Chinese people, and the other with the nature and the building of Chinese civilization. So the new historians have been continually asking who were the earliest Chinese and in what manner was the Chinese civilization developed. I shall make an attempt to answer the above two questions in a general way and on the basis of modern archaeological discoveries. Let me take up the racial history of the Chinese people first. Well, all of that, I think, is dealt with much better in this book. You've got more information. As I say, I don't remember exactly, but he probably is using some DNA stuff, and the dating may well be more precise. But even so, it's really worthwhile to see what he was thinking and what was the consensus at the time. So just a couple of tidbits that I found interesting or amusing. So the Shang is the first historical society. And so this, he talks a little bit about there was some prehistory going on at the site as well. Well, this tells you about the precursors. The economic conditions of the three types of community in the word stumps me because it's new. The economic conditions of the three types of community in the Aeneolithic and proto-historical periods, the Yangshao, that is the painted pottery culture, the Lungshan, the black pottery culture, and the Xiaotun, the Shang culture, are clearly reflected in the faunistic remains collected from these sites. The fauna of the Yangshao remains consist only of pigs, dogs, and cattle. Neither sheep nor horses were found. In Chengzuyai, the type site of the black pottery culture, the list of the animal bones includes those of pigs, dogs, sheep, oxen, and horses. In both Yangshao and Chenzuyai, deer were also found. Whether they were domesticated or not is not clear. On the whole, bones of wild animals were rare in both of the prehistorical sites. This is certainly an indication of a quiet, sedentary life devoted entirely to agriculture and the keeping of a few domesticated animals. If there was any game hunting, it was limited to the hunting of a few deer. But the faunistic assemblage from the Shang remains, I keep using that as a verb when it's a noun, but the faunistic assemblage of the Shang remains at Xiaotun is much more remarkable, not only for its greater variety of domesticated animals, for it includes oxen and buffalo, sheep and goats, dogs and horses, and 2 varieties of pigs. But there is also an impressive list of wild animals, ranging from monkeys to whales, and comprising bears, tigers, leopards, tapirs, elephants, rhinoceroses, many varieties of deer, foxes, badgers, and so forth. The whole list of the mammalian collection, including both the wild and the domesticated group, numbers no fewer than 29 species, according to the latest estimate of the eminent paleontologist Dr. C.C. Young and the late Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. I should mention that I have a book somewhere by Teilhard de Chardin from my youth. My neighbor in my first apartment was a big fan of him, and I have one of his books, and I may have read it and got nothing from it, or more likely didn't read it and didn't find it to my liking. But now that I have this little tidbit about him, I believe it's the same man. I'm curious to know more. So I found that fact interesting. I mean, of course, with the dynasties, you start to have the creation of royalty, and it seems to be the pastime of royalty everywhere to be hunters in the wild or in eventually parks established for that purpose. I mean, and I'm not just talking about Chinese. It seems to be the thing in general. And there was one more that I thought was pretty nice, if I can find it here. Oh, yeah, this was just cute. The shapes of most of the containers found in Xiaotun could be accounted for. The tetrapods, tripods, and ringfoots, as well as the flat-based containers, evidently derived their forms from the wooden and the pottery receptacles. Tools and weapons found their prototypes in implements made of bone, stone, or antlers. There are also a number of articles whose origins are obscure. One of the Xiaotun flat-based specimens is a pan-shaped bronze, originally found in broken condition in YM331. Restored, it looks very much like a frying pan with a big rim whose diameter measures 52 centimeters. It is undoubtedly the forerunner of the frying pan used by every Chinese housewife, but its origin is rather indefinite. And of course, I have to say he's I suppose to a degree tailoring it to the Western audience because most Chinese men know a little something about handling the frying pan as well. But I liked that. And then this book has just been wonderful as far as all of the plates. So I mean, they are integrated with the text very well. You're so used to having books where the plates have nothing to do with the text. I mean, there was one that I wish I could show you that he just made reference to in another book, and it sounded so interesting that I Googled and eventually found the photo that he was talking about, or the object he was talking about. It may not have been the same photo. But this book has been great, and then the book is padded out with a whole selection of extra plates. And I have to say, over the years, you go to any museum, if they have a Chinese collection, they have just tons of this kind of stuff. And I've never really studied it. I mean, where's the book? No. When I first read this, I was still rather young. I don't think I'd been to a museum. Maybe I'd been to the Art Institute once, but I doubt I looked at the Chinese section. Well, I must have gone to a museum because I got my interest after being in Taiwan, and I naturally had been to the National Palace Museum there. But in any museum, you're going to find a good amount of this stuff, and I just look at it and I say, oh. But I find the more you learn, the more I'm beginning to pick out like excavation sites, because they will tell you that. And it would be nice eventually to really learn about some of this stuff. So I'm not there by any means. Like I say, when I go to museums, I'm just a gawker. I just look at everything like the child outside the candy shop window that Yeats was talking about in that poem, which mentions John Keats. So I will confess, I ordered the book about An Yang, written by him. It was, this is 1957. I think that book is 1977, and it was above my usual price point, but I decided that I love this book so much. I'm not saying that I'm going to read it because I want to continue with my 2025 plans. So starting with this, or I may actually backtrack and just delve into the archaeology. This is probably the first book pertaining to China on my shelf after this. And I saw this at, Great Expectations bookstore in Evanston, I believe, when I was working around the corner from it. Picked it up, never was able to get through it, or if I did, I had a real hard time with it. I mean, it's all of this kind of stuff. But I think after having read Mark Edward Lewis, and especially after having read this, I think I will be better equipped to do it. So I'm hoping that this will be my January read, then February, and then Eastern will be March, to sort of coincide with Historathon. And many years ago, I saw that there existed a fourth edition of this. This is the third edition. And I looked for it online, and it's like $50. That's the starting price. And so I looked, and I found one for $4. The seller does not have a particularly high rating, but I figure on January 1st, I will start this, and when it comes in, I will just switch over, unless it comes in beforehand. And I had no idea who Li Chi or Li Ji was, I guess. And he wrote the introduction for this. So my third historian was his student. And it's kind of a bit of a, it's not a 100% enthusiastic introduction. He's a little, he kind of lets a little bit of skepticism leak out. But it heartens me to know that there is this connection. It really makes me feel good about this. So that is where I am hoping to take things, and this should supplement my other video that I did. I will put a link to it in the description box. And as I say, this is, or not this, I can't tell from the backs. This is really not, I mean, it's fine. It's a good book, and I expect I will finish it. But then I thought to myself, well, maybe I should try to jam in another slim classic before the year turns over and get my number up to 48. And I pulled this down. Another book that's been sitting on my shelf for a long time. And I think it's about a, okay, well, it's a little bit more than I was thinking. It's about 157 pages. I don't know if I can do it. We'll see. It's of course tighter, and I don't think very much is taken up with this kind of thing. But and let me see, the plates don't take up page numbers. So we're talking 150 pages or so. But I think I don't know. Maybe I should. Maybe I shouldn't. You know, if you read ancient history, and I don't want to denigrate Shelley Fisher Fishkin for her investigations into Mark Twain. The book Huck Finn is important to Americans, and the whether to what extent Mark Twain was a racist is important to people living now. It's not to say that people in ancient China were not racists. They were not, of course, according to present day definitions. I mean, but the thing is, when you are delving into antiquity, a lot of those warts do not come through. And so I find the excitement of the ancient world to be as much about how do we know what we know as to the thing itself. And I thought I would just mention Joyce Tildesley. I haven't read this book per se. I've read a little bit into it, but I've read 3 of her other books, and all of them tend to start with a chapter about how this stuff was discovered. Given that this stuff is, I would say, going on 150 years, the excavation at Anyang is now about 100 years, that of Schliemann, 150 years. We are living in this window of time where just so much has come to the surface, and particularly, I have to say, in China, I mean, everywhere, a lot more has come. But compared to where things stood for me 40 years ago, when that was the one book that I could find, so much more is known. And so for me, the goal will be to follow it up with more current sources if I can. But it has been a time of just incredible intellectual ferment, and we have this all accessible to us. It's amazing, and you know that a lot of it is going to be lost pretty soon. I mean, you've got the problem that once anything is dug up, it's no longer safe, not safe at all. While it's in the ground or while it's under the ocean, it's relatively safe. And the way things are going, we cannot say. And then added to that, you've got this digitization of information, and stuff that's digital is very likely to disappear also because it's not dependable in the way that good old paper is. So we are living in this window, and it amazes me that there are people who do not take advantage of all of this wonderful information and knowledge that we have here. Even you can read Euclid himself, if you so choose. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.